So how many of you have heard of ISODC?
I did.
Okay, okay. So we do have a really great student membership. It's free, so that's wonderful. But it's, you know what, ISOD is such a deal, the membership. You have access to so many wonderful things as part of membership. You have free access to the OD Journal. You have access to a wonderful newsletter that comes out quarterly that should come out today, later today, our year-end issue. You have deals on conferences that we have. We have webinars. Our next conference is going to be in Alabama in May. We have a conference every May. And there's just so many great benefits of being part of this organization. I would like to encourage you to go to isodc.org for more information. I do credit this organization for helping me finish my dissertation on time. So there's just so many people that you can call on, which is really great. I'm Kimberly Barker, and I am the vice president of ISODC. And, you know, I just started volunteering, and then I started volunteering some more, and then some more. So it's really a great organization to get involved with. I want to say if you are watching this on a replay, please click on the red subscribe button, just so that you will be notified of different webinars that we have. But I do want to ask two questions as we begin today, and some of us have answered this, but if we could answer it again, that would be great. Where in the world are you today? If you could put that in the chat room, where you are coming from, that would be wonderful. And I'm not sure, now that I've seen this, shared the screen, if I can see the chat room. So maybe you could just give a shout out where you are in the world today. That would be wonderful. So I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Toledo, Ohio.
Yay!
I'm from State College, Pennsylvania.
I just love the name Happy Valley. It just makes me so happy.
I'm from Vermont.
Yay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Duncan. I'm calling from Paris, France.
Oh, wow. Oh, welcome.
Well, this is Diana Whitney. I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, but I'm currently in Sanibel, Florida.
And Andrea, where are you from?
Yes, I am from Ann Arbor, Michigan as well.
Yay! And what perspective do you bring today? I'm a scholar practitioner.
I guess I'd say I'm also a scholar practitioner.
I think the perspective that I bring is social constructionism in all that I do, as a consultant, as a scholar, and as a person who is exploring the notion of infinite sabbatical.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Oh.
My perspective is coach and consultant. I'm doing a thesis on appreciative inquiry as it applies to business transformation, sustainable business transformation.
I would say I'm a scholar practitioner. We're trying to work for development and trying to learn as much as I can as I go.
Hi, can you guys hear us okay?
Yeah.
Oh, good. So Chantel and I'm Tracy Gowans, and Chantel is here. We're in the same room. So there's two of us in the same room. But I run a change center of excellence in a corporate environment. In organizational development, so we do a lot of organizational development. We're very, very global We have about 43 countries that we interact with for pretty much every enterprise project.
Hi, everybody. This is Chantel Carson. I work with Tracy, and I lead a team of learning and organizational development practitioners.
And we really want this to be an exchange today. Andre, I do think you have a little bit of background noise, so if you wouldn't mind muting when you're not speaking, that would be wonderful. But we really want us to be able to speak and exchange today. That's really really important to us. So
Okay, sorry.
oh no problem at all. So I just you know, I've been following Diana's work for a number of years, in awe of her work, and I just am so excited about this conversation. As we all know, Diana is an appreciative inquiry thought leader. She is also a global social entrepreneur and the founder and president emeritus of Corporation for Positive Change, a global consulting cooperative. She's a founder of the Taos Institute, an international think tank dedicated to relational processes in business, education, families, and communities, and a founding advisor to the United Religions Initiative, a global network of 530 interfaith cooperation circles working for peace and social justice. That just sounds so incredible. Dr. Whitney is a positively powerful keynote speaker whose messages of hope, positive change, and the call for appreciative leadership offers practical guidance for new ways of working, living, and being. Diana's unique style of interactive storytelling inspires audiences from 50 to 1,500 at national and international conferences and leadership symposiums in Asia, Africa, Europe, and North America. Diana's presentations are rich tapestries of experience, research, and innovative practices that transform leadership and enliven relationships. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Wow.
To begin with, I just thought I'd ask a question. Can you tell us a bit about why you have written this amazing book, Thriving Women, Thriving World?
Absolutely. And thank you very much for hosting me, Kimberly. This is such an honor. And I'm delighted that those of you who have joined us today will be able to have some questions and answers and discussions. And for others listening in, just thank you. The book Thriving Women, Thriving World came out of the angst that so many of us felt around the Me Too movement. As you know, in the United States, after the elections in 2016, the dialogue about abuse, inequality, and lack of justice became louder. What had often been in the background, I mean, we knew there was inequality. We knew that we lacked social justice, but it was background. It was conversations that we had with our colleagues, our friends. It wasn't out front. It wasn't in the newspapers. And all of a sudden, what had been personal became public. And all of the conversations about abuse and injustice, particularly to women, but really to women, to children, to all people, became very public, and the conversations changed. And Me Too, Ph.D, it just was everywhere. And with that, my friends and colleagues began to ask a question that echoed, and that was, what can I do? What can I do? How can I help? And so I was living and swimming in a world where people were telling their own stories, and the pain that many people had bottled up, had not been able to talk about, was all of a sudden overflowing And so I would find myself listening and listening, but at the same time in heated discussions with people saying, what can we do? What can we do? And I simmered on that. And after a while, my own angst began to confront me. And it was kind of comical because people say, well, Diana, you're the appreciative inquiry queen or the mother of appreciative inquiry. I mean, I get all these very cute names. And I'm going, but how can I then be so full of negativity? There's got to be a way that what I know, and that is appreciative inquiry, the way we use language, the power of storytelling and dialogue, there has to be a way that these resources can make a difference, can make a positive difference. So I began asking myself the really kind of classic AI question. What is it that we want more of? Because appreciative inquiry is, in essence, a kind of research. It's an action research process. It's an interactive relational research process, but it is always about a topic, not the problem, but what we want more of. And so then I began a new simmer. And that new simmer was, well, what do I want? If I don't want abuse and I don't want Me Too and I don't want a feeling of helplessness, what do I want? And again, I began talking with colleagues and friends, and the word thriving started to emerge. The word thriving. So I went, okay, I want thriving women. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't systemic. It was just, oh, thriving women. And then as I began to talk to people, I realized that there's a flip side to all of the abuse and the Me Too. And that is when women thrive in the world, whether it's in a village in Africa or where there's microfinances in India, or whether it's where there's good health care for women, where girls are given a good education, the world thrives. That where women and children are treated equally, treated with dignity, have access to resources, are understood as different but equal, the world thrives. And so that began to be the title, Thriving Women, Thriving World. What does that mean? And so then the next thing that happened, and Kimberly and I were talking before this call about how do we get, our ideas out, how do we write, how do we publish? I got invited to speak at the Appreciative Inquiry World Conference, which was in Nice, France, in March. And as a thought leader in Appreciative Inquiry, they asked me to do a keynote, and they said, well, what would you want to talk about this year? And I said, well, everyone knows I do large-scale organizational change. I'm working on a very large project with a pharmaceutical company. I'm engaged with about 20 OD HR consultants throughout the company. It's a great story. Well, no, we've kind of heard that from you, Diana. I said, well, spirituality. Everyone knows that that's another very strong thread in my life. And I have a retreat that I do called Appreciative Alchemy. I could talk about that. Well, maybe. And I said, well, the other thing that is very, very near and dear to my heart is gender equality and women's issues. And they said, absolutely. Right now in France, we have so many issues around women and gender and inequality. We want you to talk about that. And by the way, do you think you could have some young people from some other part of the world join you on the stage? And I went, oh, sure. No idea who. And then, as would happen, I get an email from Tanya Cruz Teller saying, you know, we haven't talked since you were in South Africa about 2 years ago, but I've been using appreciative inquiry in all of my work, and especially in my work around diversity and gender inclusion. And the light bulbs went off, and I thought, okay, I have to be calm, but maybe Tanya would be a great partner for this talk, but also a co-author. So we had a Zoom call, and sure enough, she said, would love to write, would love to speak with you. And I have a colleague, Marlene, who I do a lot of work with. So let's get Marlene involved. Great. So now there's 3 authors and a presentation in March in Nice, France. And we're talking, this was November of last year. Then I get another call. Would I come to Australia for the International Positive Psychology Conference and do a full day pre-conference on gender issues and appreciative inquiry? Well, sure, I'll do that. And Carolyn Adams Miller is the person who invited me. So I said, Carolyn, how do you feel about writing a book? So in November of last year, I began conversations with people about this book. I knew it was going to be published by the Taos Institute because it had to be relational. It couldn't be about women or men. It had to be about the processes in society that are oppressive and the processes that we can create and design that create a thriving conditions for women and for men and for the world. So I was having very ongoing conversations with a number of other people, particularly women, but other people, when I told them about the possibility of this book, said, how can I contribute? So my dear colleague, Charles Gibbs, said, I would be honored to write something. So all of a sudden, the book began to take form as a book with some stories, because storytelling is so at the heart of appreciative inquiry, and a lot of appreciative questions, because it was from the beginning designed to be a book to use. So the subtitle is An Invitation to Dialogue, Healing, and Inspired Actions. We wanted the book to be something that you could pick up, you could say, oh my gosh, I'm working with a school, here are questions about how to create more gender equality in schools. Oh, I'm working with teams of women and men. Here are questions that help men be allies to women in the workplace. Oh, I'm working with people who have suffered abuse. There are questions that will support our listening and their healing. And so we've created a book that is rich with appreciative inquiry questions in a number of relevant topic areas that has stories and practical activities that can be used. And to go back to our conversation about grounded theory building, as we wrote, as we interviewed each other, as we researched, we identified 5 arts of thriving. And so the book concludes with the arts of thriving. And the first is being able to curate life-affirming stories. That is to seek out stories that are life-affirming, are life-giving, to tell stories and share them, to invite others to tell stories that are life-affirming. For example, I have a young nephew who at one point was thinking about buying a business that he had worked in for 3 years. He knew a great deal about, and he was nervous. So I told him the story of his grandfather, my father, who was an entrepreneur. And I gave him a sense that entrepreneurship is in our family. And that gave him a sense that he could do it. And he did. And it was fabulous. The second of the arts, and I kind of like this one, is creating meaningful disruptions. You know, we don't get anywhere if we adhere to the status quo. That's what change is about. Change is about creating disruption. It's about inviting people into conversations that may be hard, but that will stretch them. And from an appreciative inquiry point of view, and this is particularly relevant to your coaching work, the most disruptive thing for many people is to recognize their strengths and their own high performance pattern.
Absolutely.
And to develop a vocabulary as leaders in which they can point out other people's capacities. Because all of our relational practices are based on a deficit vocabulary and on having problems that we have to resolve. But from an appreciative perspective, I believe we can grow and we can learn and we can develop toward visions of thriving as opposed to away from pain and suffering. The third is caretaking of generative relationships. We need, all of us, women and men, we need to care for relationships. A social norm in many, many cultures is often that women tend to relationships and men tend to the work outside, other work. But we all need to learn to be caretakers of relationships that are generative, that support us, that move us toward healthy futures. Not all relationships do. So we need to learn to let go of some relationships. The fourth is celebrating strengths and successes, right? Getting into the practice, whether it's a daily practice, a weekly, but really celebrating strengths, having the vocabulary, having the eyes to see capacities and strengths, and the vocabulary to comment on them. Because what we see and what we talk about, we bring to life. And then finally, and this is so important for those of us in the field of OD, creating the conditions for thriving, creating systemically the processes, the policies, the practices that invite people into thriving as opposed to climbing out of the holes of problems. So that's a very long answer to your question, Kimberly, but obviously I love this book.
I do as well.
Thank you.
If I could follow up, one of my favorite quotes in the book, and there are so many, but one is from Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg speaking to Nina Tottenberg, where she says, "Every woman of my vintage knows what sexual harassment is, although we don't have a name for it, or we didn't have a name for it. For so long, women were silent, thinking there was nothing you could do about it. But now the law is on our side, on the side of women or men who encounter harassment, and that's a good thing." Can you talk, I mean, there's so many amazing themes in this book, but can you talk a little bit about forgiveness and why that is so important in our world today?
Wow, you don't ask light questions.
Sorry.
No, it's fabulous. It's fabulous. So the book acknowledges that there is pain and suffering. For those of us who are appreciative inquiry practitioners, we acknowledge that the world is not the way we want it to be. Some of us even acknowledge that there have been times in our lives when we've contributed to harm to other people, or that we've not always been our own better angels. I mean, that's life, that's growing up, it's how we learn, right? And in that context, forgiveness is the way that we heal ourselves and we heal our relationships. And so forgiveness can be a process that we do alone, where we just simply sit. And I think in the book, there's an activity. We sit with an empty chair and we talk to the person, and we say that we forgive them. We forgive them for the harms that they've done that we feel. But we can also say, please forgive me for anything that I've done that harms you. And so forgiveness is a relational process in which we are, in essence, clearing the energetic field. Now, it's a little strange talk, but we are all breathing the same air. We're all hearing the same energetics in the universe, the sounds. We are in one systemic world. And the more that we can forgive and clear our part of the world, the better it is for everyone. One of the most important forgiveness processes is self-forgiveness. And mostly, we need to forgive ourselves for judging ourselves, right? I forgive myself for judging myself, for thinking that I'm not a very good scholar. I forgive myself for judging myself for taking so long to do my Ph.D. I forgive myself for judging myself for making that comment, right? So if we get into the habit of, instead of analyzing, instead of criticizing ourselves, but saying, oops, okay, I forgive myself for that. And then we go on, the air is fresh, the relationships are clear. Because what we want is, we want our own health and well-being, we want to be thriving, but we want that our relationships to be thriving. Because our identities are relational, right? We are, because we're in relationship with other people. And so forgiveness helps keep that relationship channel open and clear and flowing.
You know, we are our own worst critics, aren't we?
Indeed.
Or I should say, we can be. We shouldn't be.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so finding ways, you know, because we tend to even use that to beat ourselves up. Oh, I'm such a critic of myself. Wait. Learning self-forgiveness is a kind of self-care.
I don't want to ask all the questions, but I did have a question about self-care. And that is a key topic in the book.
It is. It is. I'm just kind of going to my table of contents. And it's a theme that goes through the book, because I believe that all of us, women and men, need to take care of ourselves in order to take care of other people. That if we are overextended and we think we're doing it for the best of other people, we're really not being good role models. We're not able to be our best when we're overextended. So learning how to really care for ourselves. And it may mean quiet and meditation. It may mean exercise, but it may mean I need a new challenging project because I'm just feeling dull. I need to get on with something challenging. So self-care is, again, one of those things that's different for different people and at different times in our lives, right? We don't always need the same thing at all phases of our life, but we do need to have it as a priority. And and particularly women, because women, and this is one of the things that came out of the research and in the introductions of many chapters, you see that women are culturally trained to take care of the kids and the families. That women, if they do get money, they share it with their community, with their family. That when women are educated, they make sure that others are educated with them. That part of the macro social pattern is that women have been the caretakers. And so we have to come back from that pattern and say, yes, we can make a positive difference in the world. We can take care, but we have to take care of ourselves. So putting ourselves in the formula is very hard often for women, very hard. It's hard for all people who are of a caretaker nature. And in some ways, it goes against the whole leadership as being a steward. You know, there's a lot of leadership theories that say leaders are to be the caretakers of the organization. They're to be stewards of society, of the environment. Well, for women, we need a more self-empowering kind of leadership. We know how to do all that caring stuff, and we do it. But it's a case where male leadership theories kind of bump into who we are as women and what we need to thrive.
I have some best friends. I have a group I call my besties, and they're just so, they're committed to making me have self-care. and they're like, you know, we're doing this and you're doing this. You're going to step away from your computer and, you know, we're going to do this, whether it's just, you know, to sit and have a lunch and laugh and, you know, come together or whatever. They are very in tune to how I'm doing. And I think that that is so powerful because sometimes I think they see things that I, you know, that I can't see myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, I mean, a bit of the research in appreciative inquiry is that we are made and imagined in the eyes of other people. And that there are always those people who see something in us that we don't see in ourselves.
Yes.
And so we need to put on our glasses to see the best in other people, to help them bring it forward. I mean, your best friend, you and your best friends just have a fabulous, it's a great example of thriving relationships supporting thriving women.
Wonderful. Chantel, I see that you have a question. Would you like to ask?
Yes, actually, with Chantel and this is Tracy. We're in the same room, so we're really finding the conversation interesting. And one of the things for me is this concept about beneficial, you know, vocabulary, like that positive thinking and positive vocabulary. And to me, it's like not just what we outward say, but our internal voice too, right? That maybe nobody hears but us. And I'll give you an example. I mean, I'm just curious, like, I'm trying to be really self-aware about this, but I thought it was really interesting. Like I'll coach people, you know, people will come to me, women about, and men too, like about opportunities, job opportunities and such, and worrying about, well, I might not have this one thing. Should I pursue it, right? And of course, I'm encouraging. I'm like, of course, you know, what do we talk about it? But then it comes to me and I might see a job description or something and I'm like, oh, I can't do that. Like my internal voice, it's different than my external voice for in anyway, I'm curious, your thoughts on that, and where you would take that from you think about women and men. It's just
Well, I think it's a really, there's so many layers. It's rich. It's a really rich question. The first is, yes, our inner dialogue, our self-talk is very influential to who we are and what we do. So self-talk matters. The second thing that sort of pops up for me is just an activity that I do. It's so much fun. I've done it with groups from, I think the most we've had were like 7 different countries. And in fact, it was an ISOD meeting in Hungary. And we had a session on AI, but this activity, you just list on a flip chart, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the alphabet in whatever your language is. And then a group of people in 5 minutes, how many appreciative words can you fill in? What's your vocabulary? What is it for Z? Do you have zeal in your vocabulary? Do you have zenith in your vocabulary? How about W? Is it wonderful? What else is there? So that we see it's sometimes challenging to pull out all of these words and develop a vocabulary of life-affirming, appreciative, positive words. So I encourage you to experiment with that for yourself and with people you work with. Now, the bigger question I think that you're asking, Tracy, is that one of something presents itself as an option and we see the little bit that's not possible.
Yeah, and I think for women, it's like taking that, just putting yourself out there.
That's right.
That step. And I'll see like, I don't want to characterize men, but I see like my husband, my son, they just would jump out and try it, right? And I'm like, well, would I be good at that? Would I be helping the situation or making it hard? I ask all these things and they're just jumping out. So why not? I'll try,
Well, I think for me, this is where a series of questions becomes important. And that's why I do believe that there's questions in the book. I don't have them marked right now around risk-taking. There's a number of questions in the book that are very, very relevant. But learning to ask other people and ask ourselves, well, when have I done something like this? What is it that I have that would give me the possibility to do this? What resources? Who do I know that would say yes to this, that I could sort of emulate them? So you begin to develop a set of questions that help people reframe a situation. Because yes, some of us, all of us, find out that one thing and I can't do it or I can't do it. And there was early in my career in OD, there was a question that went something like, well, I know you're saying you can't do it, but imagine that you could. What would be the first step you would take?
The whole appreciative, right? Just
right. And that's one way to look at it. But the other way is, you wouldn't be considering this position if there wasn't something about you that was capable.
Yeah.
What is capable? And really continuing to flip the dialogue and help people see resources and strengths.
Yeah, thank you so much, because I think, as women, we need to just put ourselves out there. We'll never get there, right? If we don't try and be okay with failing and being learning. The learning is the positive from that, right?
Right.
And I think the key thing when I think about my life, and I don't care if it's a woman, a man, but it's about somebody there kind of encouraging, whether we do that for others, right? And someone else is doing that for us, but kind of putting ourselves out there and not thinking about that thing that's holding us back. But to your point, so what could I bring to it, right? I really like that. Thank you.
And you know, there's another piece to that, Tracy. Over time, I have noticed that when other people commit to being a cheerleader for others, then we develop the capacity to be better cheerleaders for ourselves. So if, you know, if I'm feeling like I don't jump out there and do things, then instead of focusing on myself, I say, okay, for the next month or week, I'm going to support people to take risks. I'm just going to see, I'm going to hear, when are they being shy, that I can say, go for it, or I believe in you, or I got your back. What can I do to support you? What do you need to do that? How can I be there for you? And by becoming a cheerleader for others, I developed the capacity to be a cheerleader for myself. So great question. Obviously, I love it.
I have actually, that's an area that I'm really interested in studying. I call it, and actually I got this from hearing Kim Cameron speak recently, the contribution effect.
Nice.
So, you know, it's what you bring to the team. It's the change you create that makes all the difference.
That's right. Lovely. Lovely. Well, I'm curious if others have a question.
I have a quick question. Like, as you say, like you work with different cultures, how you see the cultural differences in that? Like when risk taking, or women are taking risks and doing something. So there are different cultures. Like I'm from Bangladesh, I have a different culture there. So how you see those differences, or how you think we can help others to take those initiatives?
I think that's a really important question for all of us today, because we think we live in one society that's all the same. And we know, okay, if I come to Bangladesh, it's different. But if I go down the street, I'm meeting people from different cultures, right? You know, so it's a very important question. I've had the good fortune to work in many places throughout Europe, of course, in the United States, in Canada, a great deal in Asia, and somewhat in the Spanish cultures in South America, but a great deal in Asia, in India, in Japan, in Korea. And it's important always for me to have partners in the culture who can help me understand what is core to the culture and where can we push the edges. Because again, if we're change agents, we're not accepting everything from the culture. We have to push something. And when we're wanting to lift up women and equality, right, that's a very big shift for almost every society. And in order to do that, we have to accept a lot of the other things in the culture so that we're seen as understanding the culture, but challenging one important aspect. And the way we may make the challenge may simply be by having a male and a female team and absolutely demonstrating equality. Not talking about it, but just doing it. Right? We may have in some cultures where men are always the ones who open the conversation and take the lead. We might have a woman do that. And a man who is very good at supporting the woman verbally. Charles Gibbs, who has written a couple of pieces in this book about being an ally, told me this story many years ago. He does a fair amount of work in Africa, and he was invited to support a women's conference. And there were only, it was 20, it wasn't large, but women in a community coming from several villages to talk about what they wanted to do in their villages. And he got there and he said, the best way I could support them was to sit outside of the room where they were meeting and pray for them. He said, because if I went in that room as a man, they would all have deferred to me. Right? So it's important to understand the historic gender patterns and to disrupt them in meaningful ways, but not so big that people push back.
Exactly.
Right? Now, the other thing that's important in the work we do, and it's huge in the world today, is some cultures are very democratic and others are not. And appreciative inquiry is organized around giving voice to everyone. And in the United States, what that means is people who are used to having their own say, very individualistic, learn to collaborate. In Japan, people who live in a very high context, collaborative culture learn to speak out for themselves. And so in a process, it can be functioning differently in different societies, even though we're kind of doing the same process. So always, you know, be polite, do what your grandmother taught you. And that's good anywhere.
Thank you.
What do you think the history will say about the Me Too movement?
What a big question. Well, clearly, it will be talked about as a cracking open, as a time in which society around the world started to do our best to wrestle with some very big, important questions. Feminism has had waves throughout history, right? We wanted to vote. We wanted education. We want equal pay. And this now is a wave that really confronts the objectification of people, of women, of people of color, of all people. So those of us, and Saybrook certainly has been so at the heart of the humanistic psychology movement for years, but those of us who are humanists, we're seeing the confrontation of the objectification of humanity. Now, is it going to turn immediately different? No. This is one big wave. Abuse against women and men and children. And it gives us a bit of leverage to say, we need different laws, we need different practices, just across the board. So it's an opening of a bold and important conversation, Kimberly.
One thing I really have noticed as a result of it is hearing more stories about women supporting other women. And I just think that's so important. And I think we need so much more of that in the world.
Well, it's very interesting because there's one whole section in the book. I'll show you the book again, just in case you're wondering. But there's a whole section called Women Supporting Women, because our research showed that historically women don't support women. You go into the workplace and women are competing, that women are serving the men, not the women, that women just don't know how to support each other. And that there have been some kind of notable differences. Shalane Flanagan, an athlete, brought all of her competitors together and said, let's practice together, let's train together, let's all get good and better together. And so women having besties, as you call them, women supporting women is absolutely essential. And in some ways, learning to excel and thrive together, as opposed to buying into a competitive, only one person can be at the top, right? If we all hold hands, we can't fight, and we can all climb the mountain together. So you again just nailed something that's so important into the future, and important in business especially.
Yeah. Collaboration is the new competition, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome.
Well, I want to I'm watching our time here, and I want to encourage folks to get the book, because it's a book about engagement. It's not a book that you sit and read cover to cover. It's a book that you use. I said to my partner this morning, you've read the book. What shall I say? He said, tell them it has legs. It will get you out doing things. And I thought that is just the best. So it's a very practical book. If you're curious about appreciative inquiry, it's filled with questions that you can adapt and change and make your own. If you are interested in, gender issues in the workplace, if you're interested in gender issues in schools, it's just got a lot. It's written to be used.
And it is available online, right? It can be ordered
available online on Amazon. And if you do get it on Amazon, please write a review. That helps a lot. You can also get it from the Taos Institute, our publisher. But it was written to be used. So anything you can do to help us spread the word, because it's meant to be helpful in these times. So
and I could not put it down. So I did do one thorough read of it. And then I did chapters after that. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So.
Thank you so much for having me on today, Kimberly.
It looks like McLaughlin has one last question, if you wouldn't mind unmuting and asking.
I'm sorry that just my last name is there. It's Duncan. Oh. I just wanted to thank you both, Kimberly and Diana, but also just to make a reference. It's a follow-up, so I'm sorry for going a little bit back, but just the discussion about frenemies a moment ago. Dan, I wonder if you could maybe say a little bit about active constructive responding and how that can support the leadership of thriving women.
Well, I can say a little bit about it, Duncan, but that part was predominantly written by Carolyn Miller, who is grounded in positive psychology. But it is, to the best of my knowledge, it's a way of responding in which we're really demonstrating empathy, that we've heard and understood what the person said, and thereby encouraging them to go forward. Perhaps you know more about it and you could share it with us. I could find it in the book and read it.
Well, I was just interested in the, the feedback from that I was reading about the Positive Psychology World Conference you mentioned in Melbourne, and your day there with Carolyn, and in the, through the process of discovery and then design, that there was this idea in design, as I read it, that active constructive responding was really a way to support and encourage women
Yes.
in the context of sharing news about things that are going well. So I was, it resonated with me as I read it earlier, and then just the discussion recently about, you know, how to support women, how to support each other. It seemed like that might be a fit.
It's an absolute fit, and I can't find it in the book. I can't find it, but it really is an affirmation. So if somebody says, you know, I want to apply for this, then it's, I understand that you want to apply for it. What are the things that you have, and go for it. So I can't answer the question fully because it's not my work. It is in positive psychology, and other co-authors brought that to the book.
If I could just
Thank you.
share, we, you know, it's the end of the semester, so we're doing a lot of peer reviews, right? And, you know, how giving each team's feedback, right? Team members' feedback. And one thing that I've suggested is when you give feedback for someone, and I have practiced this in the workplace as well, even if it's just on the computer or, you know, on SurveyMonkey or whatever, I always go to that person. First of all, I don't give feedback that I'm not comfortable sharing with that person directly. But I almost always, I'm sure there's a time or two when I haven't, but I've tried to go to that person specifically and give that feedback to them face to face. Because I feel like it, first of all, they know exactly what I've said, right? And they're not guessing, right? But also I think that there's power, there's a lot of power in sharing that feedback.
I think that's a delightful addition to it.
Yeah.
And what Duncan is talking about, active, say it again, Duncan.
Active constructive responding.
Mm-hmm.
Active constructive responding has been researched, defined. It may be Angela Duckworth's work, but it is, in fact, all of those in the field of OD who talk about feedback could benefit by learning about it from the field of positive psychology. It's a very unique and in some ways more holistic. And again, I don't know, I couldn't even define it for you, but I know it's a very powerful process. Active, constructive responding.
All right.
Yeah, the idea is that it's a way that we can all contribute to helping women thrive, in support and encourage. I have a friend who's a new neighbor. She just came from Turkey. She doesn't speak French. She's completely overwhelmed and depressed. And I could have asked her today about how things were going, but I asked her and said, what was the best thing that happened? So this is classic AI. What was the best thing that happened since I saw you last time? And that whole energy thing that happened shifted. That's AI, but I think
yes,
it's the notion of asking, of taking an interest, of framing the question, and really supporting achievement, supporting initiatives, supporting courage, things that you were saying earlier, Diana, in fact.
indeed. It's a great example of doing it. So that's fabulous. So I'm aware of time, and I'm one of those people that want to honor. Some of you may have other places to be and things to do. Kimberly, do you want to say closing comments?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Especially thank you, Diana. This talk was, I just learned so much on so many levels, and a link will be going out to everyone who registered shortly. So you can re-listen to this talk if you'd like. And I just want to encourage you to please call someone today who would really like to hear from you.
Oh, nice.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.